So thank you, Terry, and board and committee members and the public. I want to say at the start of this that no committee meeting has been posted today because we're talking about process and not committee business. And as Terry mentioned, this workshop is being recorded. So I'm doing a deeper dive into some things related to your work as a committee member and your work in running meetings, but it is by no means comprehensive because there is just so much material to be covered. So whether you're new to a committee or your committee is new or you're being reappointed, your term of office begins when you accept your appointment, and you do that by taking the oath of office at the town clerk's counter. You'll receive a committee handbook that has all the legal summaries, laws, regulations, education materials, and town policies that you may need to refer to in the course of your committee work. We will direct you to a memo in that handbook that explains the acknowledgements that you need to return and also includes the link to the online ethics training. Hopefully, if you're on a committee, you have done all those things. We do track that information. These acknowledgements and online training are mandatory for a very good reason. You're all dedicated to serving the town in the capacity of your appointment, but you don't want your committee work to be undermined because the process laid out by these laws weren't followed. You should also have a copy of your committee's charge to understand the scope and authority of your committee's function. The committee handbook, acknowledgement forms, and the websites for the agencies that enforce these laws and regulations are accessible online from the town clerk's page or from any browser using the URL at the bottom of this screen. This, I'll say, is only a partial screenshot of the page. And today's, both the recording and all of the slide material will be on this page by the end of today. So I'm going to speak only briefly about the conflict of interest law because while it's extremely important to understand in the scope of your committee work, it is also very personal. Every situation is different. So I would suggest that you complete the conflict of interest online training before attending your first meeting, if possible. It's important to understand that if your work life or private life intersects in any way with town business, even if it's not with your committee, you need to find out if you have a conflict or appearance of conflict. The Ethics Commission is staffed by attorneys, and a chat with the attorney of the day will provide you with free legal advice that may lead to filing a disclosure form with your appointing authority and possibly recusing yourself from participating in deliberation on that project or issue. You cannot use your position to gain favor or financial benefits for you or an immediate family member. The Ethics Commission posts public enforcement decisions on their website under several categories, some of which are listed here. And as I said before, it's not limited to actual conflict. The appearance of conflict of interest is often as damaging as an actual conflict. It's complicated. So if you think you might have a conflict, get advice before a potential violation occurs. I get calls from committee members asking what to do if they think they have a conflict, and I always refer them to the Ethics Commission. Remember that they will not advise me about your potential conflict, and their advice is always confidential.
Kari, can I just interrupt for 1 second?
Yes.
You mentioned that before starting, committee members should take the conflict of interest ethics test. Could you please include the link for that when you post all this other material? We have
that. Thank you. That is actually on the website now under the board and committee web webpage that is accessed from the town clerk's office. So that link is there. It's a training rather than a test, because
Right.
there's no failing the test. If you
Right.
guess wrong, you keep guessing till you get to the right answer. And there's an explanation of why that may not be the right, or even it may be right, but not the best answer.
Thank you.
Thank you, Terry. So moving on to the open meeting law. This law sets the parameters for getting committee work done. It ensures transparency in the deliberations on which public policy is based. The educational materials include the guide, the law, regulations, and very helpful checklists. It's a lot of material to review, but it's critical to understanding how to properly post, conduct, and make a record of governmental meetings. So let's plan a meeting. In order to hold a public meeting, you have to first post an agenda. If you're not sure what to include in the agenda, there is, as I mentioned, a checklist in the committee handbook from the Division of Open Government that is very detailed. Besides the when and where, it's important to include enough detail that a reasonable person would know what to expect at a meeting. In other words, should they attend? For instance, don't just say you'll be reviewing a report. Indicate the name of the report. What is it about? Why are you reviewing it? If you're accepting minutes, indicate the date of the minutes. It's okay not to include detail about a public forum agenda item because you can't anticipate what the public will say. However, when significant new topics arise under public forum, you should consider scheduling that item for a future meeting to allow proper notice and full discussion. If your meeting has to move to a new location, you need to post the new location at the meeting location that has changed, and you may need to delay the start of the meeting, depending on how far the new meeting location is for the original one. This may happen if you find out that you're going to have a larger turnout for a meeting than you had anticipated, because there is a high interest item on your agenda. Once you create your agenda, you have to post it publicly in order to legally hold the meeting. The public posting needs to happen at least 48 hours, and that does not include weekends or holidays, as Chris mentioned earlier, before the meeting. If you have regularly scheduled meetings, send us the dates to add to the online calendar. This will help us, and it will also help you to remember to forward that agenda. And give us time. The 48-hour notice minimum is to the public, so it has to be on the website. The town clerk's office needs to get the posting sooner so that we have enough time to comply with the law. If you give us 15 minutes, if you give us an hour before the meeting, we may not see your email until that 48-hour clock is passed. So for an example on posting dates, a typical Monday meeting has to be posted by Thursday. 24 hours from Thursday is Friday, and 24 hours from Friday, not including the weekend, is Monday. Normally a Tuesday meeting has to be posted by Friday. But if the Tuesday meeting follows a Monday holiday, it has to be posted by the previous Thursday. And the date of your agenda has to be clear. I'll give you a recent example where I neglected to update the day of the week for a meeting that was being held for the registrars. So instead of Friday, October 22nd, I had kept a previous agenda posting of Wednesday, October 22nd. I checked with the Division of Open Government just to be sure, especially since I'm giving the training and advising people, because I wanted to know if it would be valid, since the date was correct, but the day was wrong. But because I had noticed the error less than 48 hours before the meeting, I was told that because the original posting could lead to confusion, I should reschedule the meeting. It was frustrating, to say in the least, but I understand the notice has to be clear. If there is any room for confusion, then it's better to delay. Now, the best practice to get your agenda posted on time is to forward, of course, your agenda early. Remember that for the sake of transparency, more detail is better. Most of you email your agendas, so if you create it electronically, name your file something meaningful. Our municipal archivist, Nate Smith, recommends entering the year first in the date so that you can sort it more easily. Include the word agenda and your committee name. Once the agenda is posted, it may be changed in less than 48 hours before the meeting if the chair did not reasonably anticipate the agenda item that is being added earlier. When you make such a change, you need to note it on the amended agenda so that when we upload it to the web, it is clear for people. When we upload an agenda to the web and we upload subsequent agendas to the web, it always shows as a new agenda so that people can see previous agendas. They can also see the date and timestamp that is automatically set by Civic Plus, which is the web service that we use. So they can see that the agenda was posted in a timely manner. For new committees, at your first meeting, your first order of business is to elect a chair and a clerk. It is recommended also that the committee elect a chair and a clerk annually. The chair sets the agenda and runs the meeting while the clerk keeps a record of the meeting. Anyone may propose agenda items, but the chair has the ultimate discretion over the final agenda. Committee members may not deliberate outside of a posted meeting, but discussing the date and location of a meeting is not considered deliberation. Forwarding an agenda item is also not considered deliberation as long as there is no opinion accompanying the agenda item. A quorum is a simple majority of the established membership of the public body, unless otherwise provided in a general or special law or other provision. This is from the Division of Open Government. If you don't have a quorum, you don't have a meeting. Without a quorum, you aren't deliberating on committee business, you will make no committee decisions, and you will not have minutes. A quorum at a social event is not deliberating about committee matters and does not need to be posted. And as I said before, today's workshop is not about your committee business, it's about process. So no posting for your committee is needed. So there's often confusion between what a sub-quorum is and a subcommittee. If you don't have a quorum, you are having a conversation. In a subcommittee, however, the committee has designated more than one person to work on an assignment. A subcommittee can be formed intentionally or inadvertently. If two people are assigned to create a report that they will present to the full committee at a later time, those two people constitute a subcommittee because they have been assigned by the committee and they're doing committee business. If only one person is assigned to create a report to present to the committee, then there is no subcommittee because only one person has that responsibility. An individual working on a report or a project can consult with someone else, whether it's a member of the committee or someone outside of the committee. As long as that person hasn't been assigned to the project, and as long as they don't reach a quorum or inadvertently reach a quorum through serial communication. This is something that I get asked about a lot, and it can happen quite inadvertently. So when a committee is discussing a project If it's something that clearly would need more than one person to accomplish the task, to assign only one person to the task and assume that they will bring other committee members in is not really assigning one person to the task. So you have to be realistic when you're thinking about who can help to get committee work done outside of a committee. So let's talk about serial communication. This can happen very easily via email, social media, or any other means of communication. As soon as a quorum is reached with a communication relating to committee business, an open meeting law violation has occurred if it is not conducted in open session. This includes edits to documents such as minutes or reports. One person should get the edits and share a compiled copy of the edits at a meeting or post it online prior to the meeting. This way, all information flows in one direction. Some ways to avoid this accidental serial communication via email is to use blind copy when sending information, again, without opinion, such as agenda items. The entire point of the committee is to do its work in plain view of the public. So you can see here a subquorum discussion among 2 members of a 5-member body is, so you don't have a quorum, it's only between 2 people and it goes no further. It's when you add whether you tell one person and they tell someone else on the committee, or you tell 2 people independently, you've still reached a quorum of 3 people if you're a 5-member committee. Serial communication also applies to subcommittees. If it's a 2-member subcommittee, every meeting of that subcommittee has to be posted. So how do you get work done? The wheels of government turn slowly, but as a resident with interest in town government, you can appreciate this from the public side of the table too, I'm sure. It's all about process. So while you can't invite your entire committee to edit a report on Google Docs because edits constitute opinion and opinion is deliberation, there are ways to independently get work done to a point that you can have effective deliberation and reach a point of agreement within reasonable time. I do mention site visits on this slide, and a lot of committees don't have them, but just so that you know, site visits aren't required to be posted, but then you can only view and take notes. You can't actually have discussion, even in the form of questions to an applicant. It's another challenge. So how do you get committee work done? You can bring efficiency and transparency closer together by delegating the work among individual members of a committee and then reporting back. Posting a meeting packet along with your agenda, which is something that's done by regulatory and policymaking boards, can really help you move the process along. By posting the material online, you're opening the door to public process. And this also allows committee members to review the work before a meeting. Don't try to work around open meeting law, rather see what you can do within the boundaries of what is transparent. Most committees don't need to hold executive sessions at all. But if you do, executive sessions, you need to know, are excluded from public participation, but they're allowed for very limited reasons. There are 10 purposes that are listed in your committee handbook. And there's also a checklist to make sure that your committee enters into executive session properly. The meeting agenda must include as much detail as circumstances allow. And one of the 10 purposes needs to be cited. The meeting always starts in open session, and there's very specific language that the chair must use when entering executive session. That is also in the checklist. If you've never held an executive session and you think that you need to hold one, please contact your appointing authority to be sure about this. As Chris mentioned at the beginning of this workshop, remote participation is allowed until April of 2022. Conducting a remote meeting requires that all committee members are accounted for audibly, all votes are called by roll, and while meetings must be accessible, they're not required to be recorded. If they are being recorded, an announcement must be made. But to Carlin's point, having meetings recorded is really helpful, because one thing that we've seen in the town clerk's office is that meetings have multiplied. So Thursdays seem to be big meeting days where we can have upwards of 11 meetings happening in one day. It is near impossible for people to attend all these meetings, and this is a very active town and people want to know what's happening in town government. Sometimes minutes take a while to become public. So how do people know what happened at the meeting? So really do think about recording your meetings if you're holding them remotely. And of course, minutes are required for meetings of all governmental bodies, regardless of the format of the meeting. So the remote participation policy that exists, that existed pre-COVID and will exist post-COVID, unless there are more permanent legislative changes, allow that only one member of the meeting participates remotely. So this is again back when we are in person, fully in person. In that case, remote participation can't be used to establish a quorum. And the person, that one person who is participating remotely, cannot chair the meeting. The person who is going to be remote would have to let the chair know 48 hours in advance, and all votes must be roll call votes. When we get back to physical meetings, then I'm sure we'll be sending out a reminder about this. So how do you keep the meeting on track? So we've established the when and how you can hold a meeting. And it's important to maintain control of the meeting. Remember that the chair has the authority to run the meeting, call the meeting to order, follow the agenda. Ask the person proposing the agenda item what action they hope to receive from the board. Before the meeting, think about how much time should be allotted to each agenda item. If an agenda item will bring a lot of public comment, you may wish to limit comment time to 1 or 2 minutes per person rather than being selective as to who can comment. And remember that if you allow for public comment, you don't have to respond to the comment other than to acknowledge it. And while you've invested time and energy into your committee work, please don't take comments personally. So when we talk about public meetings, as was mentioned before, the public does not have to be recognized to speak. It's up to the chair to recognize speakers, but it's a good idea to recognize the public to speak. In a public hearing, the chair will open the public hearing. Generally, the public hearing has to be posted. How far in advance of the public hearing is determined by law. Planning Board and Zoning Board of Appeals, regulatory boards have their rules of when the public hearing has to be published, and abutters have to be notified because it's land-based. When the select board holds public hearings for things like street acceptance, there are other rules that are involved. So if you need to hold a public hearing, it's good to check in with the appointing authority and town departments, to town manager's office or the department that supports your board or committee, or the town clerk's office, and we will find out the information for you. And remember that the purpose of the hearing is for public input, not deliberation. And the committee will close the public hearing before proceeding with a vote. Meeting minutes, as I said before, whether they're public meetings or executive session, you have to make a record of what you discussed in detail and the exact wording of any votes that you take. These minutes are the official record of the meeting. They're permanent and they have great historic value. Drafting minutes and getting them approved may take a few minutes because you cannot discuss them or share edits outside of a meeting. As I mentioned earlier, members may receive a draft, make edits, and submit them to one person who will compile them for the next meeting. This keeps the process public. And the timing, minutes need to be approved within 3 meetings or 30 days, whichever is later. If there is a public records request for minutes, draft minutes should be created as soon as possible, because there is a legal requirement to respond to a public records request within 10 business days. So best practices for meeting minutes, there is a checklist. Of course, the Division of Open Government, in trying to help us not violate the open meeting law, has a lot of checklists. You need to have enough information that a reasonable person would have a good idea of what happened at the meeting. You don't have to have a transcript, but it needs to be enough information that someone will understand what happened. Documents that are either discussed or referenced at the meeting need to be listed in the minutes and kept for 6 months. And then they have their own retention value after that. Approved minutes should be forwarded to your appointing authority and the town clerk. And remember that reports created by and for your committee are also permanent documents. If you have a temporary committee that dissolves, once you have completed your charge, these records should be turned over to the town clerk's office. It's actually to the municipal archivist through the town clerk's office. Very briefly about complaints. Complaints relate directly to compliance with the open meeting law. It's about process. The remedy is to address the flaw in the process. The complaint process is formal. There is an official form that needs to be used. The complaint is filed within 30 days directly with the board or committee. The board or committee has to respond within 14 days to the complaint. And then if the complainant is not satisfied with the response, they can appeal that to the Division of Open Government. When you respond to the complainant, it's helpful to also forward that to the town clerk's office so we have a record of it, or the appointing authority. Because if we get further information from the Division of Open Government, if this continues, it's helpful for us to know, and we can help possibly resolve it. There is a remedy. The open meeting law has on their website training videos, which are broken down into sections. The most recent one is from March of 2018, and we know that with COVID, there have been updates. There's also a transcript available for the videos. Open meeting law contact information. This is also on our website. And now let's look at public record law and how that relates to committee records. A public record is a communication in any form, including emails, texts, tweets, phone calls, Facebook posts that relate to official government business. Parts of the Public Records Law Guide and Public Records Access Guidelines for Concord are included in your handbook because your email and meeting notes could be subject to the public records request. Materials discussed or referred to at a meeting has to be kept for 6 months because it could be subject to a public records request. Now, not all public records requests, or public records rather, are subject to disclosure. There are, however, very specific exemptions that you would have to refer to in responding to a records request where something is not available or something needs to be redacted. So the first record book here that you see was kept by the overseers of the poor. It was begun in 1879. You, the public, have records created by boards and committees before you that date back to the 17th century and are still referred to today. It's important to be accurate and to be aware of the historical value of the records that you're creating. All the records created by and for your committee are public records and they belong to the town. Many of these records are permanent, so they need to be preserved. This is why you need to forward minutes, reports, correspondence, and other committee-related material to your department that's supporting your committee or to the town archivist through the town clerk's office. A public records request can be any form of communication, but only a written request may be appealed to the supervisor of public records. As I said before, we have to respond within 10 business days. If we don't have the material, then we need to explain why and have until 25 business days to provide the material requested. A public records request is a formal request, so it's important that you let the staff person for your committee or your appointing authority or the town clerk's office know. In conclusion, let's remember that committee work is official and public business and has to be conducted and documented with that in mind. It's important to work in cooperation with your appointing authority and town staff, as well as other committees, as your committee charge may require or as the need arises. You are doing important work for the town, and I thank you and want to remind you that the town clerk's office and other town offices are here to support you in the important work you do. And if you feel at any point that your committee might benefit from some additional training, please contact the town clerk's office and we will make that happen. And with that, I'll take questions.
Thank you so much, Kari. That was a lot of material. And I see there are a lot of new people here who have not been on town committees before. So we could have a number of questions. We have about 20 minutes or so for questions, so that's good. Please raise your virtual or your real hand if you have a question. I see there's 4 people already. And try to be brief, and we'll see how many questions we can get through. So our first question is from Lois Wassoff and then Mary Hartman.
Hi,
Hi.
Carrie, thank you. That was really a really clear presentation. One thing, that occurred to me watching it is you talked about the restrictions on remote attendance that will come back into force after April of 2022. And I just wanted to confirm something with you that is my understanding. The town select board adopted a policy at some point, which actually puts additional restrictions above and beyond the state law. One of those restrictions that is town-based rather than in the state law, as I understand it, is the limitation to one person responding remotely. I'm on the FinComm, which has 15 members. So a one-person limitation to remote participation, when and if that comes back into force, is going to be a much bigger problem for FinComm than it might be for a committee that has 5 or 6 members. So I just wanted to mention that the presentation, which was great, didn't distinguish between, to my mind, between what restrictions come directly from state law and what restrictions are town-based and therefore might be subject to additional review by the select board if it chooses to.
That's a very good point. And it is certainly, policy is something that the select board can revisit. And while the state law does allow for more than one person to participate remotely, we don't know if state law is going to change by April of 2022. So because remote access has so many benefits, there may be further changes to the law.
Hi,
So I would say hold.
Yeah, I'm sorry. Also, Lois, I'm sorry. Do you mind just describing what exactly the policy is that you're talking about?
The town adopted a policy on remote participation that sits sort of as a layer on top of the state law. So there are some places where the town's policy, which is select board adopted and could be revisited if it chose to by the select board, where additional requirements are added. There are a couple of them. The one that comes to mind that was triggered by Carrie's presentation is the one that limits the remote participants in any committee member to one member, at any committee meeting to one member of the committee. That isn't in the state law. It comes to us through the town policy. Okay,
Lois, I think this is a really excellent point, and I think you and Chris and I should talk about this offline. Kari is correct. The state is talking about extending it anyway past April and making it permanent, so it may be moot. I think Chris is probably talking about something in APP 10, but we can look it up and we can work on that. So thanks for bringing that to our attention. Next, we have Mary Hartman and then Farhana Sheets.
Thanks, Terry, and thank you, Kari. That was that was a very clear presentation. I have a question. I agree with your comment that recordings of the meetings are very helpful for people who want to stay informed but can't be at meetings in person. But what is the best way for someone to find a recording? I use the YouTube search engine, which really doesn't help me find what I'm looking for. So is there a central place or a person that we can contact when we want to see a recording of a specific meeting?
It looks like Carlin might have an answer to that.
Sure. Mary, I'm in charge of the PEG Access Advisory Committee, and I work with the Minutemen Media Studio on a regular basis. If you're trying to find something, you can't find it, you can always contact me. But the best person is, the studio is trying to create playlists by committee on the YouTube website that the town uses. So one place to check is to look under your committee's name under playlists for the Minuteman Media Network. If you have a problem with that, let me know. If you have a problem with that, station manager is Mark Polly. Erin Stevens in the town is the public information officer, but she's also in charge of the station. So you have a couple of recourse options. Good.
And you can also contact me and I can try to find out.
Yeah, sometimes there's a few days delay between the time the Zoom recording gets transmitted to MMN, they process it, put it on YouTube, and you can find the Minuteman Media Network YouTube channel directly through the Town of Concord website. There's a link to the YouTube channel there.
Thank you.
Sorry, I was on mute. Okay, thank you, Mary, for that question, and Carlin and everyone for that answer. And we will go now to Farhana Sheets.
Hi, thank you. I'm Farhana Sheets. I am new to committee. And so I have a question about before the first meeting around the oath of office and having to do that in person. Is that something that I would need to schedule myself? Kind of what is the protocol or process around that to make sure that I actually get that done before my first meeting?
So calling us call the town clerk's office to schedule that. The building is open from 9 to 3, and myself or assistant town clerk Mary Lou Carney can administer the oath of office. And if you can't make those hours and there are a number of people at a committee and you're meeting in person, I am happy to swear people in at a meeting.
Those hours would work. Thank you so much.
Okay.
Thank you. We have had a number of new committees formed in the last couple of months. So there are a number of people who probably have that same question. So thanks very much for that question and that answer. I don't see any additional questions, and we have a few minutes. So I'm going to wait a minute and see. Okay, we have a question from Phil Posner.
Thank you, Kari. That was a great presentation. I wanted to go back to close to the beginning of your presentation with regard to communications between committee members or among committee members outside of a public hearing. If I understood your comments, communications between two members of a committee with respect to the subject matter of the committee's business is not a violation of the open meeting law, but communications among more than two members of the committee may be violations if the communications amount to a deliberation. Can you elaborate on what you mean by, or what the law means by, a deliberation, so we're clear on that point?
Yes, thank you. That's a really good question. Deliberation is anything that relates to the business of the committee. So if you are talking, and when you talk about 2 people and 3 people, I'm assuming that you're talking about a 5-member committee. And so the quorum is a majority of committee members that are allowed for the committee. So if you have a vacancy, you're still counting that seat in establishing your quorum. So if you have a 5-member board or a 4-member board and only 3 members are in seats and there's a vacant seat, you have 2 members become a quorum. Does that make sense to everyone? Okay. So if you are having in a 5-member committee, 2 people are having a conversation that relates to committee business. It relates to the charge. It relates to decisions that you will make or something within the realm of interest of your committee. Then 2 people discussing that is a conversation. You're not deliberating because you can't, because you don't have a quorum. If you have more than 2 people and you're talking about anything that will be coming up on an agenda, there is an official definition of all of these terms of quorum, of deliberation, in the open meeting law guide that is in your committee handbook, that is also available online. this becomes very complicated because, you can talk about an agenda among a quorum, but the minute you start inserting your opinion that I think this is important, or I really, want to say something about this agenda, or that's too bad that this can't be, done differently as a comment into the context of the agenda item, that becomes a problem because now you're inserting your opinion into the agenda discussion. And it's something that the public has a right to know. You're representing, you're wearing your committee hat as soon as you're having a conversation about committee related subjects. You're no longer speaking in your individual capacity.
Thank you, Kari, for that clarification. And I believe, I'm not sure if I'm correct, but I believe that you are allowed to discuss scheduling when the meeting will take place, or whether it's going to be Zoom or hybrid, as long as you don't get into any content, opinions, etc. Should it be on Friday or Monday at 2 o'clock, period? Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay, thank you. And we have a question now from Nick Pappas.
Yeah, Kari, your examples were all about a 5-person committee. Could you explain, in the case of a larger committee, say 7, how a third person's involvement in discussions would be allowable?
So in a 7-person committee, a quorum is 4 people. So if you have less than 4 people discussing, you don't have a quorum.
Okay, so as long as it's not a deliberation, for instance, if it were just discussions about some brainstorming or something like that, about something that might come up as an issue the committee might want to address in the future, that might be allowed.
Only if you have, so if you're discussing why it's important to be discussed, and so you're bringing 2 things up. You're talking about 3 people, which is a sub-quorum in itself. So you can't deliberate with 3 people on a 7-person committee because you don't have the authority to deliberate until you have a quorum.
Right, so what could you discuss? Could you give an example?
So for a 3-person sub-quorum,
Yes.
you can have a conversation.
About anything?
About anything.
Okay, that was.
Because
okay.
you're not, right, because you're not acting as a committee, because you can't act as a committee.
Right, so if you wanted.
So you can't deliberate.
Right, so if 3 people just wanted to have a discussion about a topic, it has not come before the committee, and it's just something they want to explore, they can do that.
Yes.
Okay.
As long, now I'll throw another wrench in there. As long as they haven't been, it hasn't been discussed at a committee, why don't you 3 people go and discuss these things?
Right.
Because the minute you say that, you've created a subcommittee.
Right, got it. Thank you.
Okay.
Okay, do we have further questions? As Kari said, all of this material will be posted on the website. Okay, I see another question from Diane. Hold on 1 minute there, Diane. And Chris Carmody, where is all of this material going to be posted from today's session?
I think as Kari said, it'll be posted on the town clerk's website.
All of it, including Carmen's talk and your talk, all the talks. Okay, great, thank you. Okay, Diane Proctor.
Thank you very much, Terry. I'm the chair of the CPC, and we often assign a project to 2 people to go and study and consider and work together in analyzing a particular project. So are we only allowed to I mean, we can't discuss that during the meeting, we have to, the idea is that we prepare and think together about the best way to do something. Is that therefore a violation of the open meeting law, Kari? And how do we conduct those discussions?
Right. So when two people are assigned to work on something, you are a subcommittee. So you need to post meetings and have minutes of your discussions.
Diane, could you tell the people assembled what the CPC is and what it does briefly?
Oh.
Thank you, Stephen. Good call. It's the commission, it's the Community Preservation Committee. And so we have not been doing that, Kari, and thank you very much. We will do so in the future.
Okay. Do we have time for one or two more questions if there are any? Okay, Nick Pappas, could you put your hand down, please? I think you don't have another question, I don't think. And we have two more questions and then we'll wrap up. Amanda Kahn is our new Sustainability Director. Welcome, Amanda. And then we'll have a question after that from Laura Davis.
Great, thank you. Mine is a follow-up to Diane's. That was, an honest mistake. There was a subcommittee formed. Are there steps that would need to be taken if something like that happened?
So that would be called a remedy, and a remedy is to prepare minutes as soon as possible. If something inadvertent has happened, the recovery is to make it public.
Okay, thank you. Laura Davis.
Hi there. I just wanted to clarify which communications, email, text message, etc., are public record. Is it when you've reached a quorum? It are communications between two committee members that's a sub-quorum? Are those public records? Just curious about that.
So a public record is anything that you communicate as a committee member to someone. So if someone made a public records request and asked for all emails from or to this person who is a committee member relative to a particular item that has come up before that committee, that all of those emails would be considered public record because it is a communication that you have done on behalf or for the committee.
When you say on behalf of the committee, is it just any issue related to committee business to anyone, regardless of whether they're on the committee or off the committee? And it's just like topically related, not necessarily,
Right.
I'm a member of this committee and I'm saying this about this topic that we discussed at our last meeting. Just trying to understand the scope of that. Because for instance, for the Transportation Advisory Committee, is any email that I send to anyone that has the word school bus in it a public record? That's what I wanted to understand.
So when you have your committee hat on, when you are a member of a committee, then anything that would be coming before the committee that relates to committee business that you are communicating outward is a public record.
Maybe
because you have your committee hat on.
Yeah, so maybe I can illustrate that a little more for your example, Laura. If you say to somebody, "I'm going to be late. I had to put my kids on the school bus," that's not a public record. If you say, "We really need to figure out a better way to organize the drop off of school buses as a matter of transportation policy," then that would be a public record. One of the things a lot of people do on boards and committees is they set up like a Gmail account. So it'd be, Laura Davis, TAC, Transportation Advisory Committee @gmail.com. And so they keep all that stuff. If you email Chris about scheduling a hybrid meeting, that's a public record. And I think the thing with emails and texts is where it's the open meeting that usually gets people in trouble because they start expressing their opinions over emails to each other. And that's something to avoid.
But just to clarify, I think Laura is asking, I think your question, Laura, is if you email another person on the committee about school bus policy, that would be a public record. But if you email your neighbor who's not on the committee, your neighbor asks you a question about school buses, I don't think that's a public record.
If she's answering in the capacity of a committee member, then yeah, it is.
Right. Right. If you're answering on behalf of the committee, then it's a public record. You just answering as a neighbor, then, and you're speaking as an individual, then I don't think it is a public record. So it gets a little tricky there.
It does get tricky.
Okay. I think we have one more question from Phil Pappas, and then we're going to go to the next section on town meeting with Carmen. Go ahead, Phil, if you have another question.
It's a comment and a question. There seems to be a tradition in Concord of individuals who are members of committees making comments in public or in conversation, prefacing their comments saying something like, I'm saying this as a private citizen as opposed to being a member of the X committee. I'm wondering if the town has a policy or a guideline with respect to how people who are members of the committee express themselves on matters that are the subject matter of the committee, but completely outside of the context of the committee. So in discussing school buses on, and school bus schedules, committee members aren't forbidden from discussing that with third parties. They're not, they don't give up their First Amendment rights at the door. But I understand that committee members can't make comments as if they're members of the committee. So I'm wondering if the town has developed a policy or guideline so that it's clear and folks can follow it.
So let me just take a quick stab at that, Phil, and then I'll see what Stephen and Kari think. Usually that comment is made when the committee has not taken a position on a certain matter. And one particular person wants to express, let's say, a town meeting, it's not that the whole committee, I'm not speaking on behalf of my committee right now. I'm speaking as an individual, Terry Ackerman on East Bridge Road, because my committee has not voted on this matter. So that's when you usually hear that comment. So that's not exactly what you're asking, but it might relate. Stephen?
Yeah, I think, and I've heard that over the course of my career a lot. And I think, and Kari, if I have this wrong, please correct me, but once you get sworn in to be a member of a committee, you don't really get to decide when you're a committee member and you're not. And so I think when you speak as a private citizen, you're still a member of the Transportation Advisory Committee, and things you're saying constitute you expressing your views as a member of that committee, even if you say you're expressing them as a private citizen. And so I think that Terry's right. It's more like if you show up to a hearing on a particular matter and you announce that I'm a member of the Transportation Advisory Committee, but I'm speaking on my own behalf, it means that the Transportation Advisory Committee didn't vote to authorize you to make a statement or didn't take a vote to express an opinion on a thing. And so you're not expressing the committee's opinion or statement, you're only expressing your own. But the things you say are still, they're still tied to your service on a committee, even if the subject matter isn't necessarily. That's my view of it, but I could definitely have that wrong.
Yeah,
I agree with that.
Correct. Mary Beth, if you have a very quick question, we will take it. And this is an absolute last question. And then if you have more questions, please contact Kari.
Yeah.
She's very accessible and there are many questions on this conflict.
Okay.
So
Yeah,
go ahead, Mary Beth.
I'm not sure my question is quick. You can decide, and if it is not, I can follow up and talk about it with Carrie. But I'm soon to find myself as the liaison of one committee with another committee. Specifically, sorry, my video is weird. Specifically, I'm on the Commission for Disability, but it is being allowed that I also can be the liaison for the Commission on Disability with the Bruce Freeman Trail. And I was wondering how you thread that needle. If I'm asked, as a committee member on the Bruce Freeman Trail, if I vote on an issue, am I voting? Am I making a decision about,
Right.
I don't understand how.
Right,
it works.
Mary
It's
Beth,
something I need. Yeah.
my understanding is that you're going to be a full member on that.
Yes.
Junction. So you will have voting rights. And if I'm wrong, somebody correct me, but you might want to discuss this offline.
Okay.
Well, just very quickly, there are liaisons to committees, and they are usually, or like the finance committee calls them, observers.
Okay.
And so liaison observer role. However, there are committees that are constituted specifically of people from other committees because of their knowledge, expertise, experience, jurisdiction. And Transportation Advisory Committee is kind of one of those where, a person may be on there specifically because they're a member of the Commission of Disabilities. That means they're a full committee member with full rights of participation in voting. And so make sure you know which role you're filling before the meeting. But if you're a liaison, it's really, you can certainly engage in the conversation. That's really up to the chair, but it's important to know. But if you're a member, you're a member. If you're a liaison, it's more an observational role.
I actually think I'm a member. I think you got that right, Terry, when you corrected me. I think I'm going to be a full member of both the commission and the Bruce Freeman Rail Trail Committee.
Right. That's
so
correct.
I do want to think about how this works in terms of,
Okay.
open
So
meeting. Yeah,
I would urge you to talk with Kari then.
Yeah.
sure. I can do that.
Okay. Okay, so thank you.
Okay,
We're
Kari,
going
thank
to move on now. Kari, that was an excellent job trying to cram all that material into an hour. Really appreciate it. And again, I encourage everybody, if you do have specific questions like Mary Beth or general questions, Kari is an expert in this matter. Please contact her.